and then you have an egg carton with 12 slots, the 12 eggs fit perfectly in 12 slots. You don't have to have a quarter egg or a half an egg. In the same way, each of these little planetary orbits, like the orbit of Mars, there's a perfect number of those cycles that fits into the master cycle. There's no leftover. And we didn't even know that such a thing existed, but he actually crunched all the numbers based on the Sumerian data, found that it did exist. So, that's all based on the second, which again is the heartbeat of the universe. So what I'm trying to say is that there will be this period of time every 6.2 million years in which the Earth is in the exact same position in this big cycle that it was before. And when that happens, if you have a creature that flies through the wrong place at the wrong time, it can instantaneously jump through what we would think of as millions of years of time, because the cycles are now overlapping. And so in time-space, those realities are all lined up. So we think of it as millions of years, but it's not millions of years when you're at the end of the cycle. It's actually the same point. Those points converge in time, and it would only be when you're at the farthest point away from the cycle, when you're at like the halfway point away from the cycle, that it might be the greatest distance. But the distance in terms of time-space is only measured by how far through the cycle you are. And when the cycle ends, you're basically at the same point again. And so normally we're protected from those cycles causing us to pop out of one reality and into another. But when you go through a very high energy condition, you have the ability to make sudden leaps in time, even across gateways of millions of years. So as a result of that, we now know that there is a vortex point on the Earth known as the Bermuda Triangle, which is obviously the biggest one. This man named Ivan Sanderson combined together all of the existing data in the late 1960s of disappearances of airplanes and ships on the water. And what he found was that there were 12 points on the Earth's surface in which everything would disappear at various times. And all the disappearances clustered around these 12 points.
There's that number that's divisible again.
Exactly. It's harmonic. But it gets even stranger than that, because the 12 points are all equally distant from each other. Exactly. So now you have to deal with the fact that you have 12 equidistant points. And that starts to suggest geometry. In fact, if you connect those 12 points together, you get a regular solid object. It's called a regular solid in geometry. It's known as an icosahedron, and it's a shape that has 20 equilateral triangles. It looks kind of like a disco ball with 20 triangles on it. And that's what's inside the Earth as an energetic frequency. It doesn't exist as a crystal or anything. It's just it's a vibration. And so, in fact, the way that these fields work, I was already talking about the idea that the only reason why physical matter exists is because of a vibration of energy in space-time merging with a vibration of energy in time-space. And then it's the combination of those two that counter-rotate inside each other that makes chemicals and molecules as we know them. And everything is built from that. So there is a vibrational frequency, and it's known as the global grid, and it basically represents the resonance of the Earth because, again, when this fluid-like energy is vibrated, it creates geometry automatically when the vibration is pure. So if you take the white keys in the piano, those are your pure frequencies. And again, as I said, the numbers are always harmonic in seconds. It's 288 cycles per second, 360 cycles per second, 432, et cetera, et cetera. All the 576, the numbers are very clean, and they have lots of divisors. So those same harmonics, if you play that same frequency into water, the water will show you beautiful geometric objects that appear if you have tiny little particles floating in the water called colloids. And that's the research of Hans Jenny, spelled Jenny, which I have in the 2012 Enigma video. You can Google that, and just Google 2012 Enigma, you'll find a copy of it. So, this is a function of how the universe works. The universe is built to use vibration to turn into geometry in this fluid-like energy, The geometry, in turn, interfaces with its opposite, which is in time-space. It exists in the time field. So it's those two that come together and form physical matter as we know it. Once you understand that, then you can also see how an object like the planet has a resonance between space-time and time-space, and it will have a base frequency of geometry for space-time and a base frequency of geometry for time-space. And those two geometries counter-rotate. So now here's another thing. If you actually Google Fosar-Bludorf, which is spelled Fosr-Bludorf, Fosar and Bludorf wrote a paper that is very common, and it's forwarded constantly around the internet. And the first sentence of the paper, for those of you who've seen it, as soon as I say this, you'll recognize this. It says, the human DNA is a biological internet, and in many ways superior to the technological one. And as soon as you see that sentence, you know you're in the Fosar-Bludorf article about DNA. It has a lot of good information in it, including the stuff that talks about Dr. Peter Gariev and his research that showed, which I've talked about many times on the show, that you can shine a laser beam through a salamander egg and redirect the beam into a frog's egg, and the frog egg mutates into a salamander. You actually can rewrite DNA with a wave. So that's one of many things that Fosar-Bludorf talk about in that particular article. Now, another thing that people don't know, it's much less popular, and I've been just waiting for the right time to release this, is that they also discovered something in the Earth that they call TLR, and I don't remember off the top of my head what TLR stands for. But what they found was that there is a 194-day cycle in the Earth in which it appears that a straight line of energy is rotating in the opposite direction of the direction that the Earth is spinning. And it takes 194 days to complete the cycle. But when this thing is spinning around in the opposite direction of the regular rotation of the Earth, if you can measure it, you can measure where this line is in over the course of the 194 days. And what happens is that if the line ends up in the same spot where there was a ship that disappeared, then if a plane disappears and that line is right there, then 194 days later, if the line is in the same spot again, and a plane is flying over that area, the plane could disappear again. So this line that counter-rotates with the Earth in 194 days is what actually causes planes to disappear. And that literally means that this is the energy from the time field that is counter-rotating, and it's a geometry. And it counter-rotates with the regular geometry that makes the Earth. And when those nodes line up, when this line that's counter-rotating on 194 days lines up with certain vortex points on the Earth, like the Bermuda Triangle, like these 12 points that Ivan Sanderson discovered, then you have the possibility that space and time can bleed through, because you have the geometry from time overlapping with the geometry from space. So basically what you'd have to do to really be able to visualize this is, let's take a simple example. Let's say you have a cube, and then inside the cube is a tetrahedron, which most people can visualize because it looks almost exactly like a pyramid, except at the bottom is a triangle. Now let's say that you can hold the tetrahedron in your right hand on the tip, because all three of the faces come up to a point on top, and then in your left hand you hold the cube. Now let's say that you start turning the cube counterclockwise, and you're turning the tetrahedron clockwise with your other hand. Now you wouldn't be able to do this very long because your wrists can't, swivel, but you would be able to do it enough to see the basic effect, which is two geometries that rotate in opposite directions sitting inside of each other. Once you look at that, you can see that at certain points, the edges of the tetrahedron, the triangle edges, will touch the edges of the cube. When that contact is made, you have a stargate. You have the blending together of the energy of time with the energy of space. And this is the basic thing that's happening with these 12 points that Sanderson discovered around the world. It's just a slightly more complex geometry. But it's the basic principle that That geometry stays the same. Those vortexes are always in the same place. What changes is this other geometry that's inside the Earth and counter-rotates in a 194-day cycle, so that when it crosses over, you then have to look at other things. The next thing you have to look at is where is the planets and the sun, because it's not enough for it just to cross over. That happens all the time. You also need certain planetary alignments to happen, which pull even more energy, and that's when these hyperdimensional bleed-through effects can occur the most. And again, you also have cycles in the solar system of 6.2 million years that can make it happen. So this is all this stuff that deals with time-traveling dinosaurs, as I'm saying. So now, finally, we can trace our way back to what we originally started on, which is Dan Burrish, and the fact that he didn't even know any of the stuff that I just told you. But I said to him, did you ever notice anything about geometry that came from the people that you were working with? And he said, yeah. In fact, one of the things that he worked with was a Stargate device that, in order for it to work, it had to be put on a certain spot on the Earth's surface, which was right next to an archaic pyramid in Egypt. It's one of the pyramids that's basically fallen to ruin. So it doesn't look very good. It just kind of sits there. But it doesn't look like a pyramid much anymore. But nonetheless, the vortex point that it's on is very strong. So they have this special device that was built all the way back 11,000 years ago, which allows them to be able to open a Stargate. But you have to do it at the right point on the Earth and at the right time because of this physics. Now, he didn't get into actually how to concoct the right time to do it. You have to have a launch window, basically. But he was able to look over the shoulder of some people that had the information. And doggone it, if these guys that were calculating this didn't have an exact map of exactly the same geometry that I'm telling you Ivan Sanderson discovered. So when he drew this for me without knowing anything about this physics, and it was exactly the same shape, I was like, oh my God. Now I knew, okay, this is not all phony. I mean, obviously, the planes and the planes and ships are disappearing at these points. That's documented. Another thing that's very interesting is that Papua New Guinea is a little island that sits above the middle of Australia. If you look at Australia, it's kind of shaped like a pancake. That's you can most people can visualize the shape of Australia in their mind. It's like two pancakes connected together in the middle, kind of a wide pancake that bends at the top. It's in kind of an arch shape. Above that is a little spot of islands in the middle. And right around those islands is one of these, it's a sub-vortex in the Earth's grid. It's not one of the 12 points Ivan Sanderson discovered, but it's another major point on the grid that you can see on any of the grid maps, which are on my website. And the grid map I'm referring to is called the Becker-Hagens grid. So this is one of the major points on the Earth's surface where these hyperdimensional effects take place. And in Papua New Guinea, we have multiple sightings of dinosaur creatures that have popped through time, including one called the Ropen. And villagers have been seeing this thing for hundreds of years, and it is a pterodactyl. It actually has been drawn, and based on numerous eyewitness testimonies, a man named Jonathan Whitcomb went over there because he's a forensic videographer. He basically takes video shots of scenes where people have been killed. And he also is able to do forensic sketching. So he went over there and interviewed these guys and was able to get a forensic sketch of what everybody is seeing. And you have to understand now, you're talking about walking through the fields, and all of a sudden you see this gigantic brown lizard flying in the air with a 20-foot wingspan, up to 25 feet wide. And this is a hostile creature. It's got sharp teeth. It attacks human beings. And it's very dangerous. They call it the Ropen. There's Zambia and Zimbabwe, also in Africa, have legends of it. They call it the Kongomoto. If you go over to the Native Americans, there's something called the Thunderbird. And if you actually analyze the legend of the Thunderbird, it's precisely the same thing again. It actually, they've drawn pictures of it.